Hey, are you looking for ways to help nonprofits in your community, or are you looking for volunteer ideas to help nonprofits? Or are you a nonprofit founder and you need suggestions for how to use volunteers? I'm going to talk about that today in this video. Let's get into it. Hey, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help, make sure you subscribe to this video because I drop videos every week. And today I wanted to talk about ideas for using volunteers. So this video has two different audiences. So I'm speaking to people who want to help nonprofits who want to volunteer, but I'm also speaking to nonprofit founders who just need ideas for how to use volunteers. So the purpose of the video is kind of twofold to help both types of audiences. A little later in the video, I'm going to give 3 tips for volunteers if they want to approach nonprofits. So 3 things to keep in mind, and also I'm going to give 3 tips for nonprofits if they want to use volunteers for a lot of the work that they do. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a list of places where, if you're nonprofits, where you can list opportunities or find volunteers, and then vice versa. If you're volunteers looking to help, I'm going to give suggestions for where you can find opportunities as well. Okay, so in this video, I'm actually going to give you 7 different ways you can volunteer to help nonprofits, which also are 7 ways that nonprofits can use volunteers to assist with their operations. So the first way to help nonprofits is to be a social cheerleader. And so I just made up that word. I didn't really get it from anywhere, but you get the idea, right? So nonprofits, their success really depends on their ability to be visible, their ability to gain the trust and credibility of the public. So a great way to do that is to be very visible online, and especially using social media. So if you are a volunteer and you want to help in a certain way, you can help with a coordinated campaign to consistently share, like posts, and also engage with posts. So social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube actually reward the people who create the content when their followers like or write on their posts or share their posts. So it's actually a very positive thing to see that happen on a consistent basis. So I'm not saying do this every now and then. I'm saying have a coordinated campaign where a set of volunteers knows that if a post is going to come out from the nonprofit on a certain day and a certain time, everyone knows to go to that post and share, like, and write under the bottom of it. So when other people see that a lot of people are commenting and engaging with a page, they wonder like, oh, what's up with them? So they must be pretty legit. And so they kind of get behind that because of the sense of credibility that it brings. And again, the platform rewards people who engage, who have engaging followers. The second one is helping with communications, and it's very much related to the first one I just talked about, but this is kind of on the flip side. So instead of being on the end, being the end user, you can actually help create the messaging, help create the communications. So nonprofits are always looking for people to help with their social media. They're looking for people to help with their email marketing. And it can be expensive or hard to retain people in those positions, right? So a good way to help assist with that is to volunteer to help create content calendars. If you're good at writing, to volunteer to help create the communications for nonprofits so that they can keep up with that kind of stuff. Sometimes when you're doing the work, you're doing the programming and dealing with clients, stuff like communications can fall on the wayside if you don't have a dedicated person to do that. So by having a volunteer person who's responsible for that and can help organize that is extremely helpful for a nonprofit. The only thing I'll say is that you want to be very careful with your brand. So if you're using a volunteer, or if you are a volunteer, make sure you're clear on what to say, what not to say, how to approach certain topics, how to respond to certain comments and things like that, so that anything that's put out on behalf of the organization is done in the way the organization wants it to be and it's on brand. The third way you can help nonprofits is by lending your professional expertise. So there are a lot of people who have technical skills. Maybe they're a lawyer, maybe they're an accountant, maybe they're a designer, right? Or maybe even like a grant writer who could be of immense support to nonprofits. A lot of times, especially for new nonprofits, they just can't afford specialties like that. That's like a luxury to have like a designer or to have like an accountant or to be able to afford an accountant or to be able to afford a lawyer. So stepping in to help a nonprofit to lend your expertise can be extremely helpful. And even as a volunteer, you can't volunteer a lot of hours. You can volunteer for different bits and pieces of the work. So maybe as a lawyer, you can review contracts or review policies for the nonprofits instead of actually drafting the policies or doing something very detailed. If you have experience in grant writing and you don't have necessarily the time to do that, maybe you can train up other volunteers to do the grant writing, or you can train staff to do the grant writing so that the nonprofit has those skill sets long term and are not only depending on you. So if you do have some kind of technical expertise, nonprofits would love to leverage your resources so that they don't have to pay out of pocket for a lot of the things that they need. And a lot of nonprofits depend on grant funding, which can be restricted, which doesn't give them the flexibility to pay for services like that, to pay for a service with an accountant or a lawyer. So that's another reason why I called this out as a potential way to help, because it's just one less thing that they have to pay for. The next way you can help nonprofits is with their fundraising. And there's a very specific type of fundraising that is very useful to engage volunteers with, and it's called peer-to-peer fundraising. Now, I did another video explaining what peer-to-peer fundraising is, and if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you've probably heard me talk about it because I love this strategy for raising startup funds for nonprofits. So essentially with peer-to-peer fundraising, a group of volunteers commits to raising a certain monetary amount. They engage and activate their networks, their personal affiliations, their professional affiliations, and they get people fired up about the cause and they ask people to donate. And the reason why this works is because people give to people or organizations that they know and trust, so that when someone they know and trust asks them to give, they're way more likely to give than if it was just your organization asking that person on its own. And the great thing about peer-to-peer fundraising is it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It does take some time to coordinate the campaign and get the materials together, but once you as a volunteer have the information you need to spread the word about the organization, then it really doesn't take much else in terms of money to get that going. And the return is so great because as a volunteer, you just want to help. You're fired up to spread the message of the organization. And by doing that, you're actually bringing visibility, you're bringing more networking opportunities, and you're bringing money to the organization. So if there's any way as a volunteer, you can organize your family, your friends, your social and professional affiliations to give to an organization. That is a very powerful way you can help support a local nonprofit. The next way you can help a nonprofit is by helping to put together items or helping to deliver tangible items. So you as a volunteer can help put together packets, put together information. If the nonprofit has classes and they pass out information, maybe the nonprofit needs help collating the information and disseminating it. If you have like food baskets or things like that, you can come in and volunteer and help put those baskets together. And also you can help deliver. So a lot of times it can be expensive for nonprofits to pay for insurance for cars or pay for gas and maintenance of vehicles. So they may not have that, but as a volunteer, you may be able to assist with that and actually do the delivery and the dissemination of certain things that they may not have the capacity for. So number 6 is organizing a drive to collect items. So sometimes nonprofits don't necessarily need money, they just need items. So maybe again, using the example of a food pantry, maybe they don't need money to purchase food, but they need the actual food to give out. So you could organize drives within your local community, maybe in your local church or in your local faith community. You can organize people together to donate items on a regular basis to support a nonprofit. I've seen this also with organizations that help kids who are in foster care. So they'll do drives to organize like birthday presents for kids in foster care, or maybe they'll do drives for the homeless to pull together kits for toiletries, and that include toiletries and things like that. So there are many different ways you can do this, and it just depends on the nonprofit and what it needs. But this is a great way where it's not even about money. It's just about pulling together resources and items to support the nonprofit. And the last suggestion for ways you can help nonprofits is to help at events, right? So events can be a lot to put on just logistically, right? You need people to help with the setup and the cleanup, with running the program, with helping with registration, and all the different things that go with events. And so a lot of times nonprofits need bodies. They just need people to actually do the work. They need worker bees. So as a volunteer, you absolutely can step up and assist a nonprofit in doing that. So they don't have to rely so heavily on their staff, or maybe they just don't have enough staff to get the work done. But the event can help them raise money, or the event can help bring visibility to their organization. And it doesn't even have to be a major event. Maybe the nonprofit is vending at a local community fair and they need someone to represent at their table so they can have someone there to talk about the work that they do. That's one great way you can volunteer, and it doesn't take a lot of work and it doesn't take a lot of effort. All right, so are you a volunteer looking for ways to help a nonprofit? I'm going to share some things you should consider before you decide to go in to volunteer for a nonprofit. First thing I want you to consider is that nonprofits know what they need. So a lot of times volunteers may approach nonprofits and say, we want to do this for you. But if you're looking at it that way, I recommend you adjust your thinking, because you may be making assumptions about what you think a nonprofit needs and they actually don't even need it. And you're actually maybe making it harder for them, because it's hard to say no to a volunteer because people get offended. And then when they're given stuff that they can't use, they actually spend more time trying to figure out how to deal with it. This happens a lot when people want to donate certain things and they just want to get rid of, and they assume that it'll be easy for the nonprofit and they can just get it out of their hands, but it creates a hassle for the nonprofit. So instead of assuming what you think the nonprofit needs, ask them how you can help. Ask them what they need, and then based on what you're able to do, you guys can align yourselves to figure out how you can mutually support each other. The second thing I want you to consider is make sure you're skilled in a particular area before you decide to volunteer for an organization. I know you want to help, and I know you want to just do some good in your community, but you don't want to create a tough situation for the nonprofit by being a liability to the nonprofit. So if it's a particular skill that you need to be able to have to do the work well, then maybe you should consider that that's not the opportunity for you. So make sure that you're actually offering something of value, and you're not putting the nonprofit staff in a tough situation by forcing their hand and forcing them to tell you no for something that you should know whether or not you're appropriate or not to do. And the third one I really want you to consider if you are volunteering, especially if you're working directly with a client population, and especially if that population is a population that you deem as needy or you deem as underserved. I want you to understand that just because someone is in need of a service or in need of the help of a nonprofit doesn't make them less worthy, doesn't mean that they're of a lower standard than you. And you need to be very mindful about how you talk about clients, how you address them, and make sure you uplift their dignity in the work that you're doing, and you don't treat it as charity. It is all our obligation to provide service and to help each other, because we are all interdependent on each other. And just because someone is in need of services because they may be going through something in that time doesn't mean it's right for you to look down on them or to shame them for decisions they may have made in their life. So if you're going about it that way and you're looking at people as charity cases and you're pitying people, then you really need to reconsider whether that's the right position for you. Because just because you decided to volunteer, it's a great thing, but it doesn't necessarily make you better than the next person. So I do want you to kind of check yourself and make sure you're not going about it being offensive in how you're approaching the volunteer work that you're doing. All right, so are you a nonprofit? Let's switch to you all. Are you a nonprofit staff person or board member? Well, I have some tips for you as well. First things first, make sure you create descriptions for the work that you want to do. It's a great thing to have volunteers, but you want it to be organized, right? So you don't want people to come to your organization to help and they meet an unorganized mess, because you may lose a potential long-term supporter, or you just don't want people to have that perception of you in the public. So be organized about how you're dividing up the work. Be very clear about what you need them to do. Have very clear instruction, because the clearer you are up front, the less issues you're going to have later on down the line with people, not being as confused about what they're supposed to do. You just don't want to mess. So make sure you clearly outline the descriptions of the work, and make sure you have people in charge of kind of coordinating the volunteers so it's organized and everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. The second thing I want you to consider is that you do need to train your volunteers. A lot of times, because people step up, we're so excited about it that we just assume they know how to do the work and they can do it well. But you need to make sure that they're trained in the work that you need them to do. But most importantly, they're trained in how to speak for your organization. So these are people who are representatives of you. They're extensions of you because they're doing work for your organization. And you want to make sure that they know your values. You want to make sure that they know your mission. They know the type of work you do. So invest in doing some onboarding, invest in doing some training of your volunteers. So again, that there's no confusion as they begin to do work on your behalf. And the last tip I'll suggest is that make sure you vet your volunteers. So it's great that people want to help you, but you also need to make sure that the people who are coming forward to your organization are a good fit for your organization. And this is in many different ways. So in terms of making sure you do your background checks, making sure you do your reference checks, making sure if someone says they know how to do something, that you kind of vet that and make sure that they actually know how to do it. When someone does work for you, that you look over that and you monitor the work so that you're just clear that whatever goes out on behalf of your organization aligns with what you want it to be and aligns with your standards. So don't forget to also vet people. So all help isn't necessarily good help. And the more organized you are up front, the better you are to avoid bad situations down the line. Okay, so I promised at the end of the video to share some places where nonprofits can either list opportunities or volunteers can find opportunities. So here we go. The first place you can look is volunteermatch.org. You as a nonprofit can list volunteer opportunities, and you as a volunteer can find and search for opportunities in your local area. I've used Volunteer Match in particular, and it has great resources and a way to match and filter for things that you're looking for. You might also want to try meetup.org, so Meetup, because people kind of organize in terms of their interest. And you may want to schedule like an ongoing volunteer event around a theme or around a topic. And people go to that website to find people who have common interest and to just meet new people. So that may be an opportunity for you to kind of organize something with volunteers so they can grow as a group and grow together. So that's another opportunity to list volunteer opportunities and also for volunteers to find opportunities to help. Also, don't forget about Facebook and LinkedIn. So Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups are ways you can find people who have common interest, right? So you may be able to go into different groups to find people who have an interest in something and list an opportunity if the group admin is okay with that. You may even want to create your own LinkedIn group or your own Facebook group to ask for volunteers or to organize volunteers as a little community so they can come together to help the organization. And you can also just put posts out there on Facebook and LinkedIn. That's a given that you could put opportunities out there. But I wanted to call out Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups in particular because they are great resources to find communities of people. A couple more suggestions. If you're looking for volunteer opportunities, check out certain hashtags on Instagram like community service or volunteer opportunities or hashtag volunteer. You may be able to filter by your local community and find nonprofits who are listing volunteer opportunities. And the same goes for nonprofits. If you're looking for volunteers, you may want to put certain hashtags on there and make sure you have your location entered on Instagram so people can easily find you in your local area. And then finally, I'm going to give you 2 more resources for nonprofits, especially if you're looking for professional volunteers, so people to do things like marketing and design and strategy and all of that. So the Taproot Foundation provides consultants for nonprofits who need help with kind of building their infrastructure and building their capacity. So the Taproot Foundation, I'll put the link down below, and also catchafire.org. So Catch a Fire is kind of like Volunteer Match, where you can put out a request as a nonprofit for help, and then you can be matched with a professional who can do it for free. They can volunteer to provide that service for you. I've heard a lot of great feedback on Catch a Fire, and a lot of people like using it. So I'm also going to put a link to that down below for you. So that's it. So I hope this video was helpful for you all. If you have questions for me, especially questions around starting a nonprofit, which I'll also link my nonprofit startup workbook for you down below if you're interested in that. But if you have questions for me, you can always visit me at www.bostonandbudget.com, and I'll see you in the next video.